with clean living Simmons and Stanley on one side, and, on the other, Fraley and Chris, whose non-stop offset debauchery was taking its toll. "We had broads in our trailers, 6, 7 broads at a time," Chris wrote. "We were just animals." Tour manager Fritz Postlethwaite was responsible for making sure the band members arrived on set in the early morning and shuttling them home after a night of partying. He'd sleep for an hour or two before starting all over again. They were not getting along, he says, and trying to act as the peacemaker was draining. While celebrating both the last day of shooting and Postlethwaite's birthday, he and Chris took a ride in the drummer's leased Porsche. Doing 90 on Sepulveda Boulevard, Postlethwaite hit 2 telephone poles, a mailbox, and 2 cars before plowing into a post, which set the car ablaze. Thrown through the windshield and onto the pavement, Chris injured his ribs and fingers and sustained a concussion, while Postlethwaite, who was pinned inside the vehicle, suffered serious burns. If making the movie was an embarrassment enough, in Fraley's case, after a bitter argument with the filmmakers, the monosyllabic guitarist stormed off the set, leaving his very obvious, and black, stuntman to stand in for him during close-ups. An early preview screening compounded the misery. "People openly laughed," Stanley wrote. "It was humiliating." Animosity among the band members hardly abated when newspaper ads for the movie, which ultimately resembled a kooky live-action version of Hanna-Barbera's Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?, featured Simmons' demon character dwarfing the others. "The rest of the band was incensed," Simmons wrote. The movie debuted on NBC on October 28, 1978, and would eventually play in theaters everywhere around the globe. "To be honest, I thought it was a natural step in the de-evolution of Kiss," wrote Fraley, who at the point had one silver platform booed out the door. Simmons and Stanley, who bad-mouthed Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park for years until they released the European edit, titled Kiss in Attack of the Phantoms, as part of an authorized DVD collection, teamed up with the actual Scooby-Doo in 2015 for a far less mortifying feature-length animated movie. An often repeated piece of Kiss mythology goes something like this. Around the time that production on Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park commenced in May 1978, in an effort to keep the peace and their chief earners intact, Aucoin and Neil Bogart, the head of Casablanca, their record label, had a brainstorm. "Let's get each member to record his own solo album," they decided. "Even better, let's release all 4 on the same day in September 1978, not long before the movie airs." Aucoin and Bogart were always thinking big, bigger, biggest. So why wouldn't they try a stunt no group had ever attempted? "The band was really fractured then," Stanley says, "and people weren't speaking to each other. It was pretty awful." Fraley's announcement that he wanted to leave and go solo instigated the project, Stanley says. "Bill said, 'Stay in the band,'" he recalls. "You can have your cake and eat it too. Everybody should do solo albums." All 4 musicians would have an opportunity to remain in the public eye and share the spotlight equally, which would not have been the case if only one were to release an album. The fact, contrary to the legend, is that in the August 4, 1977 issue of the rock magazine Circus, Stanley and Simmons themselves revealed that each member would be recording his own solo album for release the following spring. So the records had to have been under discussion a year before production on the movie began. "They were talking about doing solo albums way before they became a reality," says former Aucoin production coordinator Stephanie Tudor. "It wasn't that they had this strong desire at the time to do it, but they knew at one point they would. But whenever you do something like that, it always looks like the band is breaking up, so that was also a reason why it was put off." "This was a way to make them happy," recalls Chris Lent, then the liaison between Kiss and their business managers, the New York firm Glickman Marks. "And at the same time serve the greater good of Kiss. It would give each person a chance to present themselves to their fans with their own music. The project was an attempt," Chris wrote, "to reinforce the idea that we were 4 larger-than-life superstars." According to Carol Ross, who ran the press office, Aucoin's publicity arm, Bill was the type of person who would take chances when people would say, "You're crazy, don't do it." But he felt the guys deserved that individual attention. They also had something to prove to their peers. "One of the things that Kiss have always had is this attitude that they're looked down upon, which they are, by other musicians," said Eric Troyer, who contributed piano and vocals to Simmons' album.